Catch-22 is Hulu's 6-part adaptation of the classic Joseph Heller novel set during World War II. I'm Rob Licuria, senior editor at Gold Derby, here with the show star Christopher Abbott. Christopher, the series had so much to live up to and to get right, given how highly acclaimed the novel is as a significant work of American literature. Was that a factor at all when bringing this show to life?
Well, yeah. I mean, for me, it was a little bit. I can't lie about that, because when, there's an added pressure, I think, when you're going to play kind of like a literary icon type character. You know what I mean? So there's a pressure of, okay, all the fans that have been fans of this book for decades now, like, do I have to live up to any kind of expectation of, And so I had that at first, but then ultimately kind of decided that all that's going to do is kind of hinder me. And there's nothing I can do to help, people's perception of that, other than, just work hard and be truthful and be honest and do it the best I can. So I had to kind of let that go. So yeah, there was a pressure, but ultimately I think that we made something very special, and a version of what the book is that I think rings really true. It captures the tone of the piece really well, which is, I think, a feat in itself. I mean, tonally it's so erratic, the way it goes from chapter. I mean, not even chapter to chapter, sentence to sentence essentially. So I mean, to kind of still keep that, but make it transcribable to screen, I think, in the writing and in the directing in that way, I thought they did an amazing job.
Yeah, I thought so too. When I watched it all, I was amazed at how it really does flow quite organically, and that would have been extremely difficult for the writers, Luke Davies and David Michaud, to do. I also found that it was very funny. Like, their scripts are very funny, and the book has a lot of humor in it, but this does too. In the face of great tragedy. The satire, do you think, is raised to 11 in this one? Do you think it's more so than the source material?
I don't know. I mean, I think that all depends how you interpret the book. I think, because I've read out, some people interpret the book as very humorous, and some people interpret the book as very heartbreaking and harrowing at the same time. So it just kind of depends on your view. And everyone reads a book differently. You know what I mean? That's all. I mean, I think that's always the funniest thing about when you're adapting something, and when people have read it already and are fans of it. I mean, in your head, you have an endless budget, and you cast it perfectly, however you envision it. So it's hard to, I think it's hard to make it specifically what each person kind of expects in that way for, or whatever story that they had in their head or picture that they haven't had in their head. But yeah.
Yeah, it is extremely funny, and I think it does kind of follow along with the story, pretty closely, and it's pretty truthful, and and that's great, because a lot of the fans of the book would have been up in arms if it wasn't. So talk us through. Yeah, go ahead.
Back to what you were saying before about the satirical nature of the thing. I think it's hard to play satire, really, right? I think the only thing that I can do, or the only thing we can do, is just play every moment truthfully. So David and Luke kind of put in all those kind of insane, kind of satirical, almost non-realistic situations. But as the actors, as all you can do is play that truthfully, and then that becomes satire in itself. So I think it's funny. I think it's funny because it's played seriously. I think it's harrowing and heartbreaking because it's also played seriously. And the humor then comes into from the interpretation of the audience, not through me playing satire or other people playing satire.
Yeah, absolutely, and that comes across really well. The authenticity of this guy and of the whole the cast is really apparent, and it's really appreciated. Were you conscious of putting any of your own spins on your Sarin, or were you just really following what you were being told by the director and what was on the script?
Well, I first and foremost I was reading the scripts, and at the same time I was reading the book. I read the book about twice over before we started filming, just to know the world, know the tone, know the story that we're telling. And whenever I read something, whether it be a script where I'm going to play a part, I think inherently I kind of picture somebody else. There, a different human in my head, image forms in my head. So then I want to play that person, whoever that is. But I still have my face and my nose and my body and my voice. So that inevitably is going to come out and is inevitably going to be told in some form, whether I'm playing a character or not, told through me in some way. So you can't help but I think put your spin on it, and if I'm putting myself in the shoes of Yossarian and filming this thing, I need to try to believe in the scenes and the moment as much as possible. So, inevitably, I am going to come out, or some version of myself is going to come out, but kind of through a few lenses of who I think maybe Yossarian is, or at least editing wise to what George and Luke and how they wrote the character. It's kind of, there's a bunch of cooks in the kitchen a little bit, but yeah.
So going back to the beginning, talk us through how you became involved in the project.
Pretty straightforward, just classic audition. The only thing that maybe wasn't so classic is that I knew I was going in right for George and Grant. So that was going to be my first audition. So I had some time, it was a bunch of there was like 5 scenes to pick, and I just, to give myself, I knew I wanted this, the writing was so good that I was like, okay, I want to leave that room without any regrets. So I worked on all of them, all the scenes, and just in case, and I just wanted to be as prepared as possible. And then, yeah, just went in. George made it very, kind of broke down the mystique barriers in a good way. Like, he wore kind of, I think he was wearing the leather helmet from Leatherheads, I think, when he greeted me, when I met him for the first time. So kind of, it broke the ice in a way that felt good. And I also then knew that if I did wind up getting this job, that I was going to get to do this part and do the series, but then also have fun, which is also important. And I did, and we did.
Yeah, I mean, that's a hell of a lot of pressure to be going into a first interview with Hesloff and Clooney. Were you shitting yourself? Like, were you nervous as hell?
I was nervous. I was nervous for that, but I was also nervous just because it was a great part. It was layered. It was complex. You get to do a little bit of everything. There's a little comedy. There's some intense drama scenes, some actiony kind of scenes too. It's like it's kind of like a proper. It's like an actor sandwich. With everything in it. So I was nervous for that reason too. Yeah, but I think luckily I've worked now long enough too, where I've been both disappointed and awarded in equal amounts. So if I didn't get it too, I would, it would have been heartbreaking, but it's happened before. So
yeah, it is what it is. You just move on.
you gotta move on. Yeah,
that's it. So like Paul Yossarian, he can't catch a break in this story. He heroically flies his missions in the hope of going home, but then his quotas are raised. His friends keep dying. His commanding officers are assholes. That there's so much that you had to do, especially in the beginning, to kind of set him up for anyone who wasn't completely familiar with the story. What was the highlight for you in playing this guy?
Well, it was nice. I'm glad you kind of saw the character that way too, because I think I think some people can almost view the character as like being a coward or something. You know what I mean? But I really, if anything, I think he's someone that, in a lot of ways, is fighting the system. And at his heart, he's an existentialist. Put into this very extreme situation, and so his psyche is for him, it's all of his worst fears coming true on a daily basis, and then and constantly increasing. Not just in terms of the missions, but in terms of how harrowing and his friends dying one by one. Yeah, so I think just in terms of inherently Yossarian being an existentialist, being put through this kind of insane series of extremely unfortunate events, you know, it makes you, it just shows, it makes you ask, like, what does it take to drive someone to hysteria, and what does it take to break down a person's psyche in this way? And that journey I thought was the most exciting.
Yeah, I think actually you've hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what I took out of it, because in the beginning he's trying to get out of it by being a bit tricky and a bit of a trickster, but then by the end, yeah, he's just broken by the end, and that is precisely, I think, the whole Catch-22 concept for people who aren't aware. It's very striking because obviously they have to maintain their sanity to get up in the air and do some very crazy stuff. But by doing that, they are kind of showing a lack of sanity. How important is that aspect of the story, do you think?
You mean just in terms of to kind of set up this insane world?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think what's nice about the story and how it's played also is that everything around what's happening is very heightened, right? Everything from the characters' names to again, there's constantly a series of unfortunate events that almost seems ridiculous. But you also have the tree, like, well, what if this was just real life? And what if things for Sarin especially just became this unlucky? You know what I mean? And just to believe in that as much as possible. I think just create, it's drama, and it's meant to be heightened in some ways. So I think it just kind of creates a perfect circumstance for entertainment in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, putting aside the source material, playing a World War II soldier in itself is something I would expect that you need to prepare for. What was involved in getting into the mindset of a bombardier?
Well, we had, like, there were experts and stuff that we had, and there, for especially for being a bombardier, there was guys that knew these planes, that flew the real planes over. We didn't get to actually fly in the planes, probably for insurance purposes, but we shot all the flying things. We shot in a real plane. It was just on a sound stage, but it wasn't like they didn't build out a plane. So everything was very real, tactile. The instruments were all real, vintage. It was exactly what it was. And I'll just say this also. And I felt this also on. I did a little bit on First Man.
Yeah.
Right, and that was like a replica, like kind of pod that we were in. And between these two jobs, being in these kind of scenarios, one being an astronaut, one being a bombardier, but it's amazing, especially of that time period, how everything feels like an old Chevy. There's no like computer system. You really, like, for First Man, you feel like you're driving like an old car into space. Everything is cranks and, again, very tactile and just real. And same thing with this, like I think, and which makes it also that much more terrifying being up there. It's an extremely vulnerable place to be in, especially in the nose cone, because you're out in front, you're surrounded by glass. You can see below you, you can see above you. All you can do is hear people on the headphones, the pilot and whoever else side gonna be behind you. So it almost feels like a strange, like, dream state that you're in. And so for Yossarian, who, but by the end is, I don't know, 50, 60 missions in, I mean, it just becomes more and more absurd, what's happening. And I think for him feels more and more like a bad, terrible dream. So in terms of, like, prepping for that, just even being in that thing alone was terrifying. It was terrifying, claustrophobic enough, and let alone just trying to imagine what it was like being, every time you went up there in the air, that there's almost more than 50% chance you were going to be killed or shot down. Yeah, I couldn't imagine it. I couldn't imagine it.
That's
but we were well prepped. I mean, we had experts that showed us that. We had a kind of like an army expert guy, Billy Budd, for the marching and for that stuff. We weren't we weren't playing like a real, like, battalion. Oh, by the way, this is on 10% battery. Just so you know.
Okay, we're almost done.
But we had experts there. But again, I think at its heart, the story is about the human condition. So it's not like I didn't have, like, soldier training for 3 months. We learned what we needed to for the show, and that was great. But it's really about these people and these characters.
That's why I just find it hard to believe that anyone would take Sarin as anything but heroic, because given the amount of missions that your character has to do in this ridiculous environment, in this tiny little pod, it just seems kind of crazy. And then you spend a big chunk of the series where your character refuses to wear clothes around the army base. And I always wonder, because, you know, just in terms of my profession, I would never have to do that. But for you, that's something that probably comes up from time to time. Were you anxious about all the nudity that came with playing this guy?
Yeah, well, in a way, if anything, it's more justified than any other nude things I've done. I've done it in plays before in other small films, but it's the most justified, I think, for me to be nude than anything else that I've done. You know what I mean? And at the same time, weirdly, because of the circumstances, more vulnerable, because when you're doing, let's say, a sex scene or whatever, like that's as expected. But this is like, there's being nude in this was, if anything, was more of a very emotional thing, you know. So there's a vulnerability just in that, and also, you know, you're nude in situations that you wouldn't normally be, you know, walking out onto a tarmac and with 60 extras around, you know what I mean? And like, so that in itself was kind of worked just for like the insane nature of what was happening. So it helped in a way, I think, you know.
Yeah, that exposure and vulnerability absolutely comes across. You know, I was just thinking, like, I always put myself in the mind of the person that I'm interviewing, and I was wondering, like, you're working with Heslop and Clooney, and you've got a script by these two amazing Australian writers. I'm a huge fan of theirs, given I'm Australian as well. And you're shooting in Sardinia, I think it was, in Rome, and also in Rome, in Italy, because it's set on an island. Yeah, Sardinia.
In and around Rome, yeah.
And I was just thinking, like, sure, I mean, it was so beautiful to look at. Even if I just turned the sound off and it wasn't even following the story. And I'm just wondering, despite it being about the horrors of war, it was set against such a stunning backdrop. And what was the best thing about shooting in Italy?
I mean, shooting in Italy. I've said this before too. In all the years that I've worked, and a lot of small films, independent films, like I've been waiting to finally shoot somewhere at least somewhat exotic. I mean, I was like, the amount of movies I've done in like upstate New York, or in New York where I live anyway, or, you know, it's great. I love it, you know, but my sister lives in upstate New York. I can visit her anytime I want. So it's nice to like finally be somewhere. And it's, you know, the book takes place in Italy, you know, also. So it just added to the heat, you know, the colors of the place, like everything was, you know, red and yellow. And it's just like, it makes it that much more real and tangible. You know what I mean? The costumes were out, like a lot of them were all real vintage, you know, of the time. So it just made everything that much more real.
Yeah.
No, I know. Yeah.
Okay. So final question. You know, when you look back at your career, at projects you've done, like, you know, you've been in The Girls, you said First Man, and you were really great in The Sinner, and other stuff that you've done a lot of theatre work. You think back and you always have that one kernel, that one memory where you just attach to how important or special that project was for you. What do you think it will be for Catch-22 in the future?
Like, do I think Catch-22 will be that special?
Yeah, and what was it about you doing that series that you think you'll take with you?
It is definitely one of those special projects. I mean, but it's everything involved in it. It's one of, like, Luke and David, I think, wrote it's truly one of the best things I had ever written. Like, I'd written, read, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was so thought out, so thorough. Like, so that alone, the project, the art of it, completely memorable. But it's everything around it too. Being in Italy, me and all the young guys in the show, you know, we all stayed in the same hotel in Sardinia. We would work all day and then go for a swim in the ocean. And like that, like for me, like time is the most valuable thing in the world. So, and time spent is like a very important thing for me. So, it was a perfect marriage of so many things on this one, because the work was good and the environment and the company was equally good, and the time spent. So it's it's a memory encapsulated in itself, just having done it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time today, Christopher. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And
to all Catch-22 fans, go to goldderby.com right now. Make your predictions. Catch-22 is up for lots of awards this year. And you can prove whether you are the best prognosticator in Hollywood. Before you go, click subscribe and look at all of our videos with contenders.